All right, we're going to talk about that later. But first, we begin this morning with new attacks between the U.S. and Iran in the Middle East and a new threat from the president. Now, President Trump says there will be more strikes tonight after he accused Iran of taking too long to reach a peace deal. He also says he plans to take Kharg Island, where most of Iran's oil infrastructure is located. In a television interview this morning, the president did say he's not sure the American people have the appetite for that move. Now, last night, U.S. forces carried out another round of strikes against multiple targets in Iran. Iran responded with counterattacks in the region. Yesterday, the president talked about the prospects of a deal.
We'll see what happens with the deal. We were really close to a deal, but they keep tapping us along. They keep playing us for suckers.
I want to bring in retired U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Robert Murrett, who's currently a professor at Syracuse University. Thanks so much for joining us. You come at a very convenient time because we just listened to the president speak on a different network. What do you make of his telegraphing his intention to take Kharg Island? I mean, that's something that Iran has warned would constitute a red line in the sand, if you will.
Yeah, Kelly, you're right, and a great question. I think based on the comments that we heard from the White House this morning, it looks like they're at least considering, starting later today, ramping up the nature of the strikes they've done, both of which have gone to what we call counter-force targets, things like radar installations or launch sites. One's related to activity in the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, Kharg Island, as you know, Kelly, is at some point distant from the SOH. It's in the northern Persian Gulf. And going after infrastructure, industrial targets like that at scale would be a significant ramp up. And just a final comment, the whole purpose of the military engagement is to try to get to a deal, a diplomatic deal with the memorandum, the MOU as it's called, as the first step of that. So you have to calibrate that very carefully. We'll have to see how that unfolds in the days ahead.
In what the president just said in this past hour, he intends to order additional strikes tonight that he says will be bigger. Last night, we saw the U.S. target what it calls key sites in Iran, while Iran retaliated effectively on U.S. allies, U.S. Gulf allies in the regions, including Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Where are we in the conflict now? Because Pakistan, which has helped as a negotiator, says talks are still ongoing. The president uses these threats to get Iran back to the table. However, energy prices here in the U.S. are up and people are suffering. So where are we in the conflict?
Yeah, Errol, a great summary. I mean, the dual tracks of diplomacy at the same time, this military engagement is a strategy you can use. We have to be very careful about it. I'm sure the diplomacy continues and the communication lines are wide open at the same time these military operations are being conducted. But the response and the announcement that we had from U.S. Central Command about this morning, Iran time, last night, our time, the strikes that took place, were calibrated. They were over things at a target set that was related to military activity and military associated sites. And then the CENTCOM announced when they were over that they were over. They said our strikes are completed, which means that they were looking to put a cap on them and make them proportional. Now, based on what we've had, Errol, from the White House this morning, that could be different tonight, and we'll have to see what happens in the next 12 to 14 hours. But if they do go after a different kind of target set, which they've stayed away from a while, that have to do with infrastructure, especially the oil industry, and in particular, Kharg Island as a target set, that would be a significant escalation, which could result in either damaging the diplomatic activity or perhaps putting additional pressure on the Iranians.
Well, to that point, I mean, you sort of laid out Kharg Island, right? It's a very, very important site for them from a financial perspective. Damaging that infrastructure, it could really, really even further take Iran back. I mean, we've heard the president say, their military is decimated, their navy's at the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz, but they've continued to hold on, almost holding out until the president feels pressure at home. Even he admitted in that interview today that maybe the American people don't have the appetite for something of a larger scale escalation. Do you think if we were to go after Kharg Island, maybe that's tonight, maybe in the days ahead, that puts the pressure on Iran because it is so important from a financial perspective?
Yeah, Kelly, it certainly does. And, the financial pressure the Iranians are already on with the sanctions and the blockade are significant. Now, having said that, there's a high risk in going after Kharg Island, and specifically that the Iranians would retaliate by going after oil infrastructure in countries like, I'll use an example, Kuwait in particular, which they've already done in limited nature, but have backed off now. But in our Gulf allies, and if we were to go after their oil and energy-related infrastructure, they could retaliate against several of our key allies in the Gulf area in ways that would be very damaging for them and make negotiations far more difficult. So, I mean, these, when you go into these things, the kinds of calculations that you make for the strike operations you conduct and what the Iranians can do in response, in addition to the threat that they have in the Straits of Hormuz, which continues because we can't get through there at scale anytime soon. But going after oil infrastructure would carry risk with it for our Gulf allies in particular, but at the same time have some additional pressure. A final comment, Kelly, the IRGC leadership in Tehran seems to be, I wouldn't say impervious, but has a very high threshold to a level of economic pain that they're willing to inflict on their own people. And again, these are the same folks that slaughtered tens of thousands of people in their streets in January. So economic pressure on Iran is certainly less of a factor than it really ought to be, just for the good of the Iranian people.
That's an incredibly important point. We have seen that they are willing to withstand a lot of pressure, especially the economic impacts. Vice Admiral Robert Murrett, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your context.
Yes, thank you.